Part 2. Because You Loved Me. Katia's Book of Memories. Until You Come Back to Me Again Extra. Just a side note. Till You Come Back to Me Again Extra, Katia's Book of Memories is basically Till You Come Back to Me Again, but told from Katia's point of view. I wish I could have known when I was younger just how precious every moment of this life is. However, I have learned this truth slowly. I am 19 now, so I will go back to the beginning and record those precious moments, the good and the bad, the pain, the sorrow, the suffering, the beauty, the splendor, the joy, the love. I almost wish we were butterflies and lived but 3 summer days. 3 such days with you I could fill with more delight than 50 common years could ever contain. John Keats. In the beginning, Orlando, Florida. Most little girls love fairy tales and dream of a fairy tale life, complete with a loving, doting mother and father, a fairy godmother, and a dashing prince. My young mind held no such illusions. My life was what most people would call a broken one. I was raised by a single mother. She was very beautiful, and many people said she looked like an African goddess with her smooth brown skin and short braids framing her face. I never knew my father or anything about him, only that he was Russian, which was where my name, Ekaterina, came from. Mama and her best friend Suzanne called me Katia. Suzanne and Mama were roommates and were as close as sisters. Suzanne was equally beautiful in a different way. With her smooth blonde hair and sea green eyes, she looked like my Cinderella doll. When Aunt Suzanne met Angelo DeLuca, I was only 4 years old, and when she brought him home to meet us, I felt like I suddenly had a best friend. He was the successful owner of a 5-star hotel and totally alone in the world, having lost his father the year before. During the time Angelo and Suzanne were dating, he would sometimes babysit me while Mama and Suzanne hung out. He usually took me shopping and out for treats and always brought me back home with new clothes or toys. I loved my time with Angelo because he made me feel loved, and he always called to say hello and ask me how I was. He really was my best friend, like the father or older brother I never had. When he and Suzanne married, I was the flower girl at their wedding. Angelo called me his little princess, and I was so happy. Their marriage meant he would always be a part of mine and Mama's life. Drugs and alcohol. Those words were foreign to a 4-year-old, but I was aware enough to know they had always been present in my home. Those 2 things seemed to make Mama and Suzanne happy, which made me happy. I had no clue, however, just how destructive those things were until 2 years later. That lesson came the day I found Mama lying on her bedroom floor. I had tried to cook a pack of noodles and burned myself when I spilled boiling water on my arm. It was painful, and I cried as I went to find Mama. She was unconscious on the floor next to her bed, her head resting in a puddle of vomit. Despite my cries and attempts to wake her, she never moved. Mama had told me the day before that she was sick, and she was going away for a while to get better. She said I would stay with Angelo and Suzanne. When Angelo and Suzanne got there, Suzanne screamed and cried over Mama's body. Angelo picked me up and held me while he called for help, but there was nothing the paramedics could do. Mama was gone. Angelo rode in the ambulance with me and held me in the emergency room while the doctor treated my burn, and I burrowed against his chest, crying. I was afraid, and he and Suzanne were all I had left. Afterward, he went back to get some of my things. Angelo had me wait in a car. He could tell I was afraid, so he kissed my forehead and promised me he would be right back. He ran inside and was back a few minutes later. When we reached his home, and now my home as well, Angelo carried me and my sack of clothes into the big, beautiful house. I clung to his neck, never wanting to let him go. Because of bad dreams, he ended up rocking me that night until I cried myself to sleep. There would be many nights like that. Sadly, through the next few years, Suzanne's drinking worsened. She was never the same after Mama's death, and Angelo and Suzanne's marriage continued to crumble. Some people would say my life was better, and in many ways it was, but sadly, I had just been taken from one tragic situation and put into another. I had heard that time is a healer. I guess only time would tell. Broken. 6 years later. It was another day at work with Angelo. He had meetings all morning at the hotel, so we didn't see Suzanne. She was still in bed when we left. She usually was. Many times she stayed in her pajamas and drank the day away, which was really sad. When I came to stay with Angelo and Suzanne, Angelo decided to teach me at home. From the very beginning, Suzanne never participated in my education. She always said she was too busy, and it saddened me that she never gave me attention. She was the only mother I had now, but I guess it really didn't matter much to her. I was 10 now, and when Angelo had meetings, I usually went with him. I would sit in his office and quietly do my work. I learned so much from Angelo, and I don't know why, but learning quickly became a need for me. I needed to take in everything I could, and I couldn't seem to stop. In addition to my school studies, Angelo taught me to play the piano, and I practiced for an hour each day, sometimes longer, wanting to play as well as he did. We soon began to play duets. He always told me how proud he was of me, which made me happy because he was happy. Angelo had studied martial arts for years, and one day I asked him to teach me. He told me it was actually Jeet Kune Do and explained exactly what it was and what was involved. As I explained to Suzanne years ago, Jeet Kune Do is a martial arts system that encompasses physical, scientific, mental, social, and spiritual knowledge. It is completely different from the other forms of martial arts. What do you mean? I ask. Well, it's all about using minimal movements and extreme speed to gain maximum effects. It's a set of tools that you use for different situations. Bruce Lee was the master of Jeet Kune Do, and he said the perfect style was no style, and you use something for everything. You use what works and throw everything else away. He didn't like formalistic fighting, which is what most forms of martial arts are about. It makes sense. He had grinned at me. But it doesn't make sense to you, does it? No, I answered, but I still want to learn. He just chuckled and hugged me, and I knew he would agree. So he began giving me lessons and instruction and told me he was blown away by how fast I had learned. Well immersed in the art, I soon moved on, needing to add something else. After watching a concert on television one evening, the next day I asked Angelo if I could learn the cello. Are you sure? He asked me. Yes, I really want to learn. He bought me a student cello, hired a teacher, and started lessons. Studying and practicing hard, I picked it up quickly. I immediately moved on to the violin and the guitar, and Angelo turned one of the extra bedrooms into a music room for me. My instruments stood in every corner, and framed posters of great musicians hung on the walls. A few months before I turned 9, I wanted to start studying ballet. Angelo didn't bother asking me if I was sure. He enrolled me in a class one afternoon a week. I advanced quickly and was now on point. He had floor-to-ceiling mirrors and a bar installed in the vacant game room. The room already had a hardwood floor, and I now used it to practice 3 times a week. Angelo said he was completely amazed by me. He called me a prodigy and always showered me with praise. He encouraged me in everything I wanted to do. It was one of the things I loved about him. He had no idea that this was how I coped. To keep from thinking about Mother, I needed to focus on other things. This was something I did not truly understand until I was older. I needed stability, and it seemed Angelo was now the only permanent fixture in my life. While Angelo sat at his desk with Tim and Andrew, I worked on my spelling book. Sensing his gaze, I looked up and smiled. Having learned sign language online, I lifted my hands and signed, "I love you, Angelo." Grinning, he signed back, "I love you too, tesoro mia." He always called me his little treasure. Angelo finished his meeting by 2. After the men left, he packed up his laptop and helped me pack up my things. "What do you say we call Suzanne and see if she wants to get out and eat with us?" "Okay, can I call her?" "Sure." He gave me his cell and I dialed. I knew there was a good chance she would say no, but there was always hope. I still love Suzanne, and I really miss the days that she loved me too. The phone continued to ring. Then it went to voicemail. "No answer at home," I finally said. "Should I try our cell?" "Yes, if she's out already, maybe we can meet her." While I called, I watched Angelo look over his appointment book and check his schedule for the next week. He closed it, his eyes growing distant, and he suddenly looked tired and sad. "Who is this?" I asked when a male voice answered. Then I heard the familiar laughter and Suzanne's voice saying to the man, "Come back to bed." I immediately hung up and handed the phone to Angelo. "What is it?" he asked, the sadness in his eyes deepening. A man answered, and what?" he said, pressing a hand to my cheek. "It's all right, sweetheart, you can tell me." Tears rolled down my face, my young heart breaking. "Angelo, he was laughing and told her to come back to bed." I started crying, and Angelo held me as I buried my face against his shoulder. I was young, but I knew what I heard. I couldn't believe Suzanne could do this to him, to us. "It's all right, tesoro," he said, whispering into my hair as I clung to him. "Everything is going to be all right." He kissed my brow. "Let's go home. We'll stop and get something on the way."